You once found joy in your hobbies. Hours spent painting, gaming, running, or reading felt alive, as if they gave you identity. But after awakening, that spark has vanished. You try to return, yet the activities that once lit your soul now feel strangely lifeless. Do you not wonder why the very things that used to energize you now leave you empty? Why what once felt like freedom now feels like confinement? This loss is not random. Your hobbies were never just pastimes. They were masks, escapes, and ways to anchor yourself in a world of roles and expectations. Ask yourself, how many of your passions were pursued because they truly nourished you, and how many were maintained to prove something, to belong, to distract yourself from deeper hunger? Did they reveal your essence, or merely protect you from facing it? Awakening strips illusions. When the persona collapses, the engines that once fueled your enjoyment collapse too. The hobbies that once propped up your identity lose their taste because they no longer match the soul you are becoming. Is this not why you feel estranged from your old joys? Not because you are broken, but because you are being remade. So the piercing question stands: will you cling to old diversions and call their death decay? Or will you dare to see this emptiness as proof that your soul now demands something truer? For only then can new life begin. From childhood, you were told to find hobbies, something to keep you busy, to shape your identity, to make you likable, productive, or balanced. And so you did. You painted, collected, played, performed, consumed activities that seemed like passion, but often were repetition of what others told you was good for you. Did you ever stop to ask, were these pursuits truly yours, or were they inherited roles you never questioned? How many of your so-called passions were echoes of expectation rather than cries of your soul? Then awakening came. It dismantled the scaffolding of your life, tearing down masks you thought were permanent. Suddenly, the hobbies that once felt alive began to taste like ash. The games you once played to escape now feel hollow. The rituals you once repeated to signal belonging now feel false. You try to return, but something inside refuses. Why? Because you are no longer the self who needed those distractions. This loss is not a flaw in you, it is a revelation about them. Hobbies often served as fuel for the persona, not the self. They distracted you from emptiness, numbed you from wounds, reinforced identities you thought you had to perform. But after awakening, those illusions no longer hold power. You see through the surface, and what once entertained you no longer nourishes. Is it not striking that the death of old pleasures often comes hand in hand with the birth of deeper hunger? Jung warned that what you cling to after it has died will enslave you. And so the question presses in, will you mourn hobbies as if they were life itself, or will you accept that their death is part of your transformation? Losing interest is not failure, it is initiation. You are not broken because you no longer care, you are being stripped of what no longer serves. The danger is not in emptiness. The danger is in forcing yourself back into dead passions, mistaking nostalgia for authenticity. So the piercing question stands, will you resist this estrangement and try to resurrect illusions? Or will you let the silence prepare you for new desires born not of masks, but of your true self? When you lose interest in your hobbies after awakening, the shift feels confusing, even frightening. Yet, from a Jungian perspective, this death of old pleasures is not random. It is a necessary dismantling of illusions. To understand why, you must walk through the key pillars of Jung's psychology: persona, shadow, complexes, projection, and the self. Each reveals why your former joys no longer grip you and why this emptiness is the ground of transformation. The persona, when masks no longer fit. The persona is the mask you wore for the world, the role that made you acceptable, admirable, or safe. Many of your hobbies were never just fun. They were performances that reinforced your mask. Did you not play sports partly because it gave you belonging? Did you not collect or create partly because it impressed others or gave you a sense of identity? The persona turned hobbies into proof of value. But awakening strips this mask. What once made you feel alive now feels like costume. The applause no longer matters, and without it, the activity collapses. Ask yourself how much of what you loved was truly love, and how much was survival. Is it not revealing that joy dies when its hidden fuel, external validation, runs out? The shadow, the demand for substance. Your shadow holds everything you denied, your anger, grief, longings, questions. Before awakening, hobbies often distracted you from this shadow. You busied yourself with diversions so you would not have to face the darker truths within. But awakening forces the shadow to rise. Suddenly, painting for approval or playing games for escape feels shallow compared to the hunger stirring in you. The shadow demands substance, not distraction. And so the old hobbies wither, not because you are broken, but because you are being called to depth. Do you not sense that your disinterest is not emptiness, but a protest of the soul? That what you refuse now is not life, but illusion, complexes, when old wounds stop driving you? Much of your passion was fueled by complexes, emotional knots from childhood. Maybe guilt drove you to overachieve, or insecurity pushed you to master a craft, or loneliness sent you into groups where hobbies became social masks. These complexes once gave your pursuits intensity, but after awakening, their power dissolves. You no longer need to prove worth through trophies, skill, or belonging. Without the wound pressing you, the drive evaporates. Is it not sobering to realize that what you thought was passion was often compensation? And is it not freeing to admit that losing interest is not loss but release from chains? Projection, when illusions collapse. You once projected salvation onto hobbies. You told yourself that if you reached the next level, finished the project, or joined the right circle, you would finally feel whole. But projection always disappoints. Awakening strips the veil. You see that no external pursuit can give you what only the soul can. And so, the activity itself becomes tasteless. Ask yourself, how many times did you chase the next distraction, only to feel empty the next day? How many times did you confuse momentum for meaning? Now that projection has collapsed, you cannot pretend anymore. The hobby is revealed as it always was, a diversion, not salvation. The self, the silent center, that waits at the core of Jung's psychology is the self, the wholeness you are called to embody. Awakening strips you of masks, distractions, and illusions so that the self can emerge. But this process creates a gap. The old interests die before new passions are born. You feel barren, but this barrenness is sacred. The self waits to fill the silence, but only after you stop reaching backward. Have you not noticed that forcing yourself into old hobbies feels worse than emptiness? That trying to resurrect passion leaves you hollow? This is because the self will no longer allow you to waste energy on illusions. It demands alignment. It demands authenticity. It demands you wait for the new fire that only truth can ignite. The interplay of forces taken together, these elements reveal the deeper mechanism. The persona collapses, and the mask-fueled hobbies collapse with it. The shadow rises, and shallow diversions cannot satisfy its hunger. Complexes dissolve, and their compulsions no longer push you. Projections collapse, and the hobbies reveal their emptiness. The self waits, demanding silence until it can guide new meaning. Is it any wonder you feel lifeless toward what once thrilled you? You are not lazy, not broken. You are shedding. You are in the painful but necessary passage where false engines die and true engines have not yet appeared. So the piercing questions confront you. How many of your old hobbies were really diversions to avoid truth? How many were performances to keep masks intact? How many were compulsions driven by wounds you no longer wish to obey? How often did you project salvation onto activities that could never give it? And most urgently, will you betray yourself by clinging to dead pleasures? Or will you honor the silence until the self reveals new passions born of wholeness? Because Jung's warning is merciless. What you deny will enslave you, and what you cling to after it has died will consume you. The loss of hobbies is not decay, it is initiation. The collapse of interest is not apathy, it is purification. You are being stripped, not destroyed. And once the self takes its place, you will find that new pursuits emerge, not for survival, not for performance, not for escape, but for the joy of being whole. Your emptiness is not absence, it is preparation. The question is whether you will endure it long enough for truth to fill it. The loss of interest in hobbies after awakening can feel like a quiet betrayal. You want to return, but the fire is gone. Yet this is not random, it is revelation. Across the spheres of your life, workplace, relationships, family, daily routines, the same pattern unfolds. What once felt like passion now feels hollow because awakening has stripped away the illusions that sustained it. Workplace, the hollow distraction of achievement. For years, hobbies may have functioned as balance against work. After long days of stress, you threw yourself into music, exercise, or collecting to soothe the pressure. It felt alive, but was it truly joy or merely escape from exhaustion? After awakening, the mask of productivity collapses, and with it, the diversions that softened its edges. You sit down to play the guitar, but the notes sound empty. You lace up your shoes for a run, but your body resists. Why? Because the drive was never pure. It was fueled by stress, not by soul. And once the illusion of work as identity dies, the hobbies tied to it wither too. Ask yourself, were these pastimes really yours, or were they anesthesia for a life you secretly hated? Relationships, shared rituals that lose meaning. Many of your hobbies were sustained by others. You joined groups, clubs, or circles not because you felt alive, but because you wanted belonging. Movie nights, gaming sessions, even book clubs, these gave you a sense of connection. But after awakening, when you can no longer betray yourself for false belonging, these shared rituals reveal their emptiness. You show up, but the laughter feels forced, the joy mechanical. You ask yourself, am I here because I care or because I fear being alone? And suddenly the hobby collapses, not because the act itself is evil, but because its hidden fuel was the need for approval. Is it not sobering to realize how many of your passions were chains disguised as bonds? Family traditions that feel like masks. Families often anchor themselves in activities that become hobbies. Sunday sports, holiday crafts, generational games. You may have carried them with pride, believing they defined identity. But awakening disrupts this inheritance. The very activities that once linked you to tradition now feel alien, like clothes that no longer fit. You smile, you participate, but deep inside you feel estranged. Ask yourself, am I honoring life here or merely repeating what no longer speaks to my soul? How many of your so-called hobbies were not choices at all, but inherited masks you wore to keep peace? Awakening reveals the weight of these masks, and your interest dies because your soul refuses to be bound by them any longer. Daily life pleasures that lose their taste. Even the simplest joys, reading, gardening, painting, gaming, watching shows, can lose their spark. What once thrilled you now leaves you restless. The book you once devoured feels lifeless after a few pages. The game that once absorbed hours feels pointless after minutes. The movie that once entertained you now feels like noise. Why? Because awakening exposes the hidden contract much of your enjoyment was distraction, not nourishment. These activities filled silence, but now silence itself feels more honest than the diversions. Have you not noticed how sometimes staring at the sky feels truer than the hobbies that once consumed you? That stillness itself feels like the only real pastime left. The common thread: death of false fuel. Across workplace relationships, family, and daily life, the same revelation emerges. Your hobbies were not merely joys, they were coping mechanisms, masks, and escapes. They depended on illusions that awakening has stripped away. Once you see through them, you cannot return. To force yourself feels worse than emptiness. Ask yourself how many of your old hobbies were tied to stress, approval, tradition, or distraction. How much of your passion was borrowed, inherited, or imposed? And now that those engines are gone, do you not see that your lack of interest is not weakness, but fidelity to truth? So the piercing questions rise. How long will you grieve the death of pleasures that were never fully yours? How many more times will you force yourself to pretend joy where there is none? How often will you mistake nostalgia for authenticity, trying to resurrect masks that your soul has already burned? And most urgently, will you dare to endure this emptiness? Trusting that what dies clears space for new desires born of wholeness. Because Jung's warning is merciless. What you cling to after it has died enslaves you, but what you let die prepares you. The typical examples of your life all tell the same truth. You have lost interest in your hobbies because they no longer serve your soul. Their death is not accident, it is initiation. The task is to endure the silence until new passions arise, not from illusion, but from the self. And when they do, you will know the difference. They will not be escapes, but expressions of who you truly are. The collapse of interest in your hobbies after awakening is not random boredom. It is the dismantling of the hidden mechanisms that once gave those pursuits meaning. Jung's psychology shows that beneath every habit lies a structure of fuel: persona, shadow, complexes, projections, and the self. When awakening tears through these layers, the very engines that once powered your hobbies collapse. What remains is the silence you now face. Psychological: the collapse of personas fuel your hobbies. Once served the persona, the mask you wore for the world. Playing an instrument, excelling in sports, collecting items, or even reading certain books, these were not only joys, but signals of identity. They gave others an image of who you were, and you unconsciously conformed to it. But when the persona collapses after awakening, the fuel evaporates. You no longer care about being seen as the musician, the athlete, the reader. Without that mask, the hobby loses its scaffolding. Ask yourself how much of your enjoyment was rooted not in the act itself, but in the identity it created for others to see. And now that you refuse to live for masks, how can the interest survive? Emotional: the withdrawal of borrowed excitement. Much of your old passion was not truly yours. It was borrowed excitement from validation, approval, or escape. The applause after a performance, the laughter during a game, the recognition of skill. All these fueled you more than the act itself. But awakening strips away your appetite for borrowed energy. You no longer want approval, you want authenticity. And so the old excitement collapses. Have you not felt the emptiness of finishing a book or winning a game only to sense that nothing in you has changed? That your soul is still hungry because the act never touched its depths? Without external validation, the hobby reveals its hollowness. Behavioral routines without anchors. Hobbies often lived in routine. Thursday nights for practice, weekends for games, holidays for traditions. These patterns gave rhythm to your life. But when awakening dismantles the old self-routines, tied to that self crumble too. You no longer show up on autopilot. You question why you were there at all. And in that questioning, the routine loses its momentum. Do you not notice how much energy it now costs to drag yourself through motions that once felt automatic? The behavioral anchor has snapped. Without illusion, you cannot sustain the performance. Ethical refusal to collude with distractions, awakening sharpens your ethical vision. You see where hobbies once colluded with avoidance. You painted to ignore grief, gamed to avoid loneliness, exercised to numb anger. They worked, but at a cost. They kept truth buried. After awakening, your soul refuses to play along. You sit at the easel and the brush feels like pretense. You pick up the controller and the game feels like denial. You try to repeat the old diversions, but something within resists. Why? Because your ethics will no longer allow you to escape yourself. Ask how many of your hobbies were sanctified distractions, ways to silence wounds rather than heal them. And can you really collude with that falsehood anymore? Existential, the void between death and rebirth. At the deepest level, the collapse of hobbies is existential. Awakening dismantles the scaffolding of the old life, but the new structure has not yet risen. You live in the in-between. The old interests have died, but new ones have not been born. This void is terrifying because it feels like death. You wonder, what if I never feel joy again? What if nothing ever matters? But Jung teaches that individuation always passes through this barren desert. The hobbies die because they cannot feed your new self, but the new passions require silence to gestate. Do you not see that your emptiness is not failure, but transition? That what you call apathy is the womb of something greater waiting to emerge? The interlocking cycle. These layers do not collapse separately, they interlock. The persona dissolves, stripping identity-fueled hobbies. Emotional validation fades, draining their excitement. Routines crumble, leaving no momentum. Ethics sharpen, refusing to collude with distractions. And the existential void expands, swallowing what remains. Each mechanism feeds the next, forming a chain reaction that no hobby can survive. You try to resurrect them, but the system that sustained them is gone. What you feel as apathy is the architecture of your false life disintegrating. So the piercing questions confront you. How much of your passion was ever truly yours? How many of your hobbies were distractions blessed by culture to keep you quiet? How long will you mourn pleasures that were never more than masks? And most urgently, will you endure the emptiness long enough for authentic desires to emerge? Or will you betray yourself by forcing joy into dead pursuits? Because Jung's warning is merciless. What you cling to after it has died enslaves you. But what you let die prepares you. The mechanism of lost hobbies is not evidence of decay, but of purification. You are being stripped of illusions so that the self can lead. Your lack of interest is not laziness, it is liberation. And the only question that remains is whether you will honor this silence or flee back into distractions. Awakening strips you of old engines, and with them, the hobbies that wants to find you collapse. But Jung's psychology does not leave you in despair. It demands you practice fidelity to truth in daily life. Application here is not about forcing joy back into dead pursuits, but about learning how to live in the silence until new passions aligned with the self emerge. Observation. Honoring the death of old joys. You must first observe with honesty where your loss has occurred. Which hobbies feel lifeless now? Which activities leave you restless, numb, or even resentful? These are not failures, they are revelations. They show you exactly where illusion once fed your energy. Instead of calling yourself lazy, you must name the truth. The mask has fallen and the fuel is gone. Ask yourself, what activities now feel like costumes you cannot wear? What interests taste like ash because they once propped up an identity you no longer claim? To observe is to refuse denial, to see clearly that your soul has withdrawn from what no longer serves. Boundaries, refusing to return to illusion. The temptation will be strong to force yourself back into old diversions for the comfort of momentum. You will hear voices internal and external urging you to just get back into it, as though productivity could cure estrangement. But to cross that boundary is to betray yourself. Jung warns, what you collude with after awakening becomes your prison. So you must resist. Ask, do I really want to force myself into the theater of hobbies that now feel hollow? Do I not feel the sickness of betraying my soul for nostalgia? Boundaries mean saying no to resuscitating what has already died. Shadow work. Grieving the death of pleasure. Losing interest is a kind of mourning. You are not only losing activities, you are losing the self who once found joy in them. And grief must be faced. You may feel sadness, anger, even despair, that what once gave you life now leaves you empty. Do not dismiss these feelings. To grieve is to honor the truth. Your shadow holds all the longing, the frustration, the rage at emptiness. To integrate is to let yourself feel it, not repress it. Ask, what am I afraid to feel now that the distraction is gone? What old wound surfaces when the game, the book, the brush no longer cover it? Shadow work here is not about reviving hobbies. It is about facing the silence they once concealed. Reframe from loss to purification. You must reframe your apathy. It is not decay, it is purification. The death of hobbies is the clearing of ground, the removal of weeds that once choked your deeper growth. What feels like emptiness is in fact the preparation for authentic life. Ask, what if this barrenness is not failure but cleansing? What if my lack of interest is proof that I refuse to waste energy on illusions? Jung teaches that the soul will not move backward. Once the false has collapsed, only truth will feed you. Reframing allows you to see that what looks like loss is actually the highest form of fidelity. You refuse to live divided. Daily fidelity, small acts rooted in authenticity. Your task now is not to force passion, but to cultivate fidelity in small, deliberate acts. Do one thing each day that feels real, even if small. Sit in silence without distraction. Write a sentence that feels true. Walk without headphones. Speak a boundary you once denied. These are not hobbies, they are practices of wholeness. Slowly, they anchor you in authenticity. And over time, new desires born of the self will emerge, not for escape, but for expression. Ask what one act today aligns with who I truly am, not who I pretended to be. Can I choose fidelity over performance, even if it feels barren? Relational discernment. Protecting your energy. Notice how others respond to your loss of interest. Some may accuse you of being dull, lazy, or detached. They mourn not your hobbies, but the mask you performed for them. This is revelation. Ask yourself, who only valued me because I shared their distractions? Who honors me even when I no longer play the old roles? Protect your energy from those who demand your collusion with illusions. Relationships purified by your estrangement reveal who belongs in your life. Enduring the silence, the most severe practice. Perhaps the hardest application is endurance. The void is uncomfortable. You long for passion, for joy, for the fire of interest. But the self does not move on demand. Its fire grows in silence, in patience, in the refusal to regress. Each day you endure the emptiness, you prove fidelity to your own becoming. Ask, will I run back to the corpse of my old hobbies for comfort, or will I endure the silence until truth awakens new passions in me? Endurance here is severe, but it is the only way the new can be born. The practical task is merciless, but liberating. Observe where death has occurred. Set boundaries against illusions. Grieve what is gone. Reframe loss as purification. Practice daily fidelity. Protect your energy. And endure the silence. These steps do not resurrect old joys, they prepare you for new ones. So, the piercing questions remain. Will you betray your awakening by forcing yourself back into diversions that no longer serve? Will you mistake emptiness for failure? Or will you honor it as the ground of rebirth? Will you collapse into nostalgia for passions that have died? Or will you trust the silence to gestate new desires, born not of persona, but of the self? Because Jung's warning stands, what you cling to after it has died enslaves you, but what you let die prepares you. The loss of hobbies is not the end of joy. It is the purification that clears the way for passions truer, deeper, and unbreakable. The only question is whether you will endure the silence long enough to let them appear. The silence you now face is not emptiness, but initiation. What you call losing interest is the clearest proof that your soul has refused to keep colluding with illusions. The hobbies that once gave you comfort, identity, or distraction have died because they no longer serve the self you are becoming. And though it feels like loss, it is purification. Have you not already noticed that forcing yourself into old passions feels worse than doing nothing at all? That the fire you long for cannot be reignited in ashes, but must be born anew. Jung's warning resounds here. What you cling to after it has died enslaves you. Your task is not to resurrect dead pleasures, but to let them go. This stage is severe, but it is sacred. For only when you stop reaching backward can new passions, authentic, whole, unbreakable, emerge. Ask yourself, will you numb your fear of silence by pretending joy in what your soul has already abandoned? Or will you endure the void until the truer fire ignites? Will you betray yourself for the comfort of momentum? Or will you remain faithful to the slow birth of the self? Because the truth is merciful but liberating. The death of old interests is not failure, it is fidelity. It is your soul refusing to waste itself on masks. It is the clearing of ground for something greater than diversion, greater than escape. So your call to action is this today: refuse nostalgia. Do not force yourself into hobbies that no longer nourish you. Instead, honor the silence. Let the emptiness teach you. One act of fidelity, one choice of authenticity prepares you for the passions to come. The old has died. The new is not yet born. Endure. For only in this endurance will you discover that what feels like loss is the beginning of a life truer than you ever imagined.